Hello everyone, welcome to Six Semper Tyrannis News. I'm your host Mark Matheny, and today I'm going to talk about Hanukkah, or Hanukkah, traditionally known by Christians and Jews around the world. I want to talk a little bit about it because I want to kind of go from a different perspective than maybe what is traditionally talked about with Hanukkah. Normally people see the Hanukkah, they call it, which is like a menorah, but it has 9 stems on it instead of 7, like the traditional menorah that was in the temple. And you often see a dreidel, you often see the geld, the chocolate coins, and these things with modern day Judaism and the celebration of Hanukkah. And it's more of a competition against Christmas almost, it seems, than it is really a celebration of the cleansing of the temple in approximately 163 BC under the Maccabeans, who fought to keep the traditions and the Torah of the Holy One. So I want to go into that more so. And, the other thing is the traditional Christian Bible and even Jewish Bibles or Jewish books, let's say the Tanakh and so on, they leave out the book of Maccabee. There's actually, I believe, 4 books of Maccabee. 1st and 2nd, 3rd, and 4th books of Maccabee. Well, we're going to look at the 1st book of Maccabee only as almost a history of what took place at that time, to give you an idea of what Hanukkah is really about. And I'm going to discuss some things that my understandings of this in light of modern Judaism and modern Christianity, which I call modern churchianity, basically. And I'm going to bring some, in my opinion, some light to all of this, because I think there's some things that need to be talked about that are not traditionally talked about when discussing Hanukkah. So the best way to do that is kind of to first go into the book of Maccabee, the 1st book, and I'm using the Douay-Rheims Bible version from Bible Hub to kind of read through it, because I believe it's a pretty decent translation. Most scholars believe that Maccabee, the book of Maccabee, was traditionally first written in the Hebrew language, and then from there translated into other languages. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll go from there. And the other thing about it is the name Maccabee, if you are not aware, it means hammer in Hebrew, but also it can come from a possible acronym meaning who is like the Holy One, meaning who is like unto Hashem. And but anyway, there is a man named Judah who was the 3rd son of the priest Matthias, who was the first leader of this revolt against the Seleucid kings who had been persecuting the Jews. And if you read the 1st book of Maccabee, it talks about this. They came in and they wanted them to change their traditions and to worship the idols of the Greeks and so on. And this is basically what happened. There was actually 2 books of the book of Maccabee, like I said. I think there's actually 4. The other 2 are a lot later and are not really ascribed to them. But the first 2 books contain these accounts of what took place back then in this suppression of Judaism in the land of Judah at the time in the 2nd century BC. And then this reaction of the of these zealots who were Torah observant and who fought against the Seleucid kings or Seleucid kings, And the first Maccabee was actually written in around 100 BC in Hebrew, most scholars believe, but the original never came down. Instead, all we have are early pre-Christian Greek translations, but they have a lot of Hebrew idioms in the translations, which shows that the first books, first copies of Maccabee was most likely written in the Hebrew language and then later translated. And more than likely by a Jew living in the land of Judea, a Palestinian, for sake of argument, is what people would say, but in the land of Judea, around that area. And he was obviously familiar with all of the traditions and the sacred books of his people, and had a lot of reliable information at that time, dealing with approximately 175 BC all the way down to 134 BC. And he might have played a part in it, sometime in his youth. But he wrote this to record the deliverance of Israel by the Holy One through the family of the Maccabees, through the family of Mattathias and his three sons, Judah, Jonathan, and Simon, or Yehuda, Jonathan, and Shimon, and his grandson, John Hyrcanus. And so he then, writes about this. There's a lot of poetry in the sections of the book, and there's a lot of developments which appear in the second book of Maccabees with Daniel and so on. But I am going to go through the first book of Maccabee because, again, later on, the Christians, most Christians except for the Catholics, believe, and the Jews determined the first and second book of Maccabee to be apocryphal, therefore not inspired, because it wasn't contained in the Jewish list of books that were drawn up at the end of the first century A.D. But it's been accepted by the Catholic Church as inspired, and it's called deuterocanonical, to indicate that they are among the canonical books. And I more so believe it to be a book of importance, whether it's inspired or not. I'm not even going to entertain that part, but it definitely is a historical document, in my opinion, that goes to show you what took place at that time. It's broken down by a crisis and then a response, the leadership of Judah Maccabee, and then the leadership of Jonathan, and then later the leadership of Simon. It kind of goes through all of these things. So I want to talk about it by first just going to the book of Maccabee to kind of give you a scenario of what took place. Very interesting as well. But it says, "Now it came to pass that after Alexander, the son of Philip the Macedonian, who first reigned in Greece, coming out of the land of Kittim, had overthrown Darius, the king of the Persians and Medes. He fought many battles, and he took the strongholds of all, and slew the kings of the earth. And he went through even to the ends of the earth, and took the spoils of many nations, and the earth was quiet before him. And he gathered a power, a very strong army, and his heart was exalted and lifted up. And he subdued countries of nations and princes, and they became tributaries to him. And after these things, he fell upon his bed and knew that he should die. And he called his servants and the nobles that were brought up with him from his youth, and he divided his kingdom among them while he was yet alive. And Alexander reigned 12 years, and he died. And his servants made themselves kings, every one in his place. And they all put crowns upon themselves after his death, and their sons after them. Many years and evils were multiplied in the earth. And there came out of them a wicked root." Now listen to this. "And Antiochus the illustrious, the son of King Antiochus, who had been a hostage at Rome. And he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. And in those days there went out of Israel wicked men, and they persuaded many, saying, Let us go and make a covenant with the heathens that are round about us, for since we departed from them, many evils have befallen us. So you have these traitorous Yehudim, these Jews or these Israelites, these Jewish men coming out of Israel wanting to betray the covenant, basically. And it says, and the word seemed good in their eyes, and some of the people determined to do this and went to the king, and he gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathens. Remember, Hashem said in Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 1, Do not learn the ways of the heathen, neither be dismayed by the ordinance of the heavens. For the ways of the nations are idolatrous. Okay? But these men decided to betray the Torah, betray their Holy One, and do idolatry. And so they built, it says, a place of exercise in Jerusalem according to the laws of the nations. And they made themselves prepuces and departed from the holy covenant and joined themselves to the heathen and were sold to do evil. And the kingdom was established before Antiochus, and he had a mind to reign over the land of Egypt, that he might reign over two kingdoms. And so he entered into Egypt with a great multitude, with chariots and elephants and horsemen and a great number of ships. And he made war against the Ptolemy king of Egypt. But Ptolemy was afraid at his presence and fled, and many were wounded unto death. So he took the strong cities in the land of Egypt, and he took the spoils of the land of Egypt. And after Antiochus had ravaged Egypt in the 143rd year, he returned and went up against Israel at this time. And he went up to Jerusalem with a great multitude. And he proudly entered into the sanctuary. Now, as I'm reading this, I want you to go back and think of the book of Daniel as well, okay? Because you're going to see some very similar explanations as to what's going on here. So it says, he proudly entered into the sanctuary, and he took away the golden altar, and the candlestick of light, and all the vessels thereof, and the table of proposition, and the pouring vessels, and the vials, and the little mortars of gold, and the veil, and the crowns, and the golden ornament that was before the temple. And he broke them all in pieces. And he took the silver and gold, and the precious vessels, and he took all the hidden treasures which he found. And when he had taken all away, he departed to his own country. And he made a great slaughter of men, and spoke very proudly. And there was great mourning in Israel, in every place they were. And the princes and the ancients mourned, and the virgins and the young men were made feeble, and the beauty of the women were changed. Every bridegroom took up lamentation, the bride that sat in the marriage bed mourned. And the land was moved for the inhabitants thereof, and all the house of Jacob was covered with confusion. And after 2 full years, the king sent the chief collector of his tributes to the cities of Yehudah, and came to Jerusalem with a great multitude. And after he spoke to them peaceable words in deceit, they believed him. And then he fell upon the city suddenly, and struck it with a great slaughter, and destroyed much people in Israel. Now remember, in Scripture, when it talks about when they say peace, peace, then sudden destruction comes upon them as a woman in labor, and they shall not escape. Here is an example of this. How he came in and he spoke peaceable words deceitfully, it says. But they didn't, and they did believe him. They believed his deceitful words, and then he came back and struck suddenly upon them with a great slaughter. And it says he took the spoils of the city and burned it with fire, and threw down the houses thereof and the walls thereof round about. And they took the women captive, and the children, and the cattle they possessed. And they built the city of David with a great and strong wall, and with strong towers, and made it a fortress for them. And they placed there a sinful nation of wicked men, and they fortified themselves therein, and they stored up armor and victuals, and gathered together the spoils of Jerusalem, and laid them up there, and they became a great snare. And this was a place to lie in wait against the sanctuary, and an evil devil in Israel. And they shed innocent blood round about the sanctuary, and defiled the holy place. And the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled away by reason of them, and the city was made a habitation of strangers, and she became a stranger to her own seed, and her children forsook her. And so look at this. And her sanctuary was desolate like a wilderness. Her festival days were turned into mourning, and her Sabbaths into reproach. Her honors were brought to nothing. And if you think about it, so these people, when they saw this abomination of desolation coming into the holy place and setting up, they fled into the wilderness. Pretty interesting. Her dishonor was increased according to her glory, and her excellency was turned into mourning. And the king Antiochus wrote to all his kingdom that all the people should be one, and everyone should leave his own law. Okay? This is kind of another symbol, in my opinion, or you see almost a repeat, like Nimrod, who all of the nations became one, it says. But yet he's telling them to, in this case Antiochus, is telling all of them to forsake their own laws. And all the nations consented according to the word of Antiochus. And many of Israel consented to his service, and they sacrificed to idols and profaned the Shabbat. Now, it doesn't say all of them did in Israel. It says many of them did. Why? Because there was a remnant who did not. But they instead continued to keep the Torah. But it says the king sent letters by the hands of messengers to Jerusalem and to all the cities of Yehudah, that they should follow the law of the nations of the earth, and should forbid holocausts and sacrifices and atonements to be made in the temple of Yahweh. Okay, it says G-O-D here because it's a translation, and should prohibit the Shabbat and the festival days to be celebrated. And he commanded the holy places to be profaned and the holy people of Israel. And instead, it says he commanded altars to be built and temples and idols and swine flesh to be immolated, and unclean beasts, and that they should leave their children uncircumcised, and let their souls be defiled with all uncleanness and abominations, to the end that they should forget the law and should change all the justifications of the Holy One. And whosoever would not do according to the word of King Antiochus should be put to death. Now, I want to stop there for a second, because if you look at this, modern churchianity, modern Christianity has accomplished what Antiochus wanted to do in the first place. To do away with Shabbat, to do away with circumcision, to make the people worship idols and eat unclean foods. This is exactly what the modern church has done. This is what the Catholic and Protestant religions have done. To forsake the Torah, to follow the ways of the nations, to bring in the destruction of the law of the Torah of the Holy One of Israel. Now, I want you to think about that. But I'm going to go on and continue reading. And whosoever should not do according to the word of the king Antiochus should be put to death. According to all these words, he wrote to his whole kingdom, and he appointed rulers over the people. They should force them to do these things. And they commanded the cities of Judah to sacrifice, okay? But to sacrifice to what? To sacrifice to their idols. Then many of the people were gathered to them that have forsaken the law of Yahweh, and they committed evils in the land, and they drove away the people of Israel into lurking holes, into secret places of fugitives. So what happened? These were the righteous people. They fled into the wilderness. If you see the shadow of Revelation, the same thing will continue. So into the future, what would it be that would happen if you think, I want you to think about this. What would it be that the beast system under the Romans, that fourth beast that would rise up, what would it do? It would do the same thing. It wouldn't come in and command you to keep the Sabbath and to, to circumcise yourself and to eat clean foods only and so on and keep the holy festivals of Almighty Yahweh. Instead, it's going to make you do the opposite. So, if you think about it, the beast system has already been set up. And many people are already following the beast. But there's going to come a time when it's going to be enforced. But anyway, it goes on, and I want you to think about this. Again, very important as we read this. On the 15th day of the month, Chaslu, in the 145th year, King Antiochus set up the abominable idol of desolation, the Shekut Shemem. The Shekut Shemem is in the Hebrew also a substitution of Baal Shemayim. And this is very intensive, but I'm gonna go into it. But my point is, this abomination of desolation that we hear of had been set up in the temple at this time by Antiochus Epiphanes. The abomination of desolation upon the altar of Almighty Yahweh. The Shekut Shemem, which in the original Hebrew was Baal Shemayim, the Lord of heaven, their God, the God of the Romans, or the Greeks, I'm sorry, not the Romans at the time, it was the God of the Greeks, Zeus Olympus, the Lord of heaven, Baal Shemayim, which then became a term that the Jews did not want to say, so then they changed it to upon Shekut Shemayim, which means the disgusting things that is abominable. And so it goes on, after they set up this abomination of desolation in the temple under Antiochus Epiphanes, they burnt, it says that they burnt incense and sacrificed at the doors of the houses and in the streets, and they cut in pieces and burnt with fire the books of the law, the Torah of Almighty Yahweh, destroying the Torah. And everyone within whom books of the testament of Yahweh were found, the Torah, and whosoever observed the Torah of Yahweh, they put to death according to the edict of the king. Think about that. So, and I want to go back and I want to talk about, you think about in the book of Deuteronomy, Almighty Yahweh gave a command in Deuteronomy chapter 6, right? Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is your mighty one, Yahweh is one. V'ahavta et Yahweh Elohecha b'kol levavecha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol meodecha. V'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anoki matzavecha hayom al levavecha. V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta ba'am b'shivteka b'veteka uv'lekteka v'delrik uv'shakibika uv'kamecha. Ukshartam le'ot ayadecha. V'hayu letotofot benenecha. Tavtam u'mezuzot b'techa uv'isharecha. So he says, you shall write them as a sign upon your hand, the law, the Torah of Almighty Yahweh. You shall bind them as a sign upon your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. This was the very thing that Antiochus Epiphanes destroyed. He took away that Torah, and he commanded people that if you should worship that, you should be put to death. If you should keep the Torah and worship Almighty Yahweh. The mark of the beast was to sacrifice idols, was to turn from the holy days of Almighty Yahweh, which are a sign that you shall know that He is Yahweh who sanctifies you. If you think about it, He made them break the kosher laws to tell the difference between clean and unclean. He made them break Shabbat, which is a sign, Almighty Yahweh says, between Him and His people, that they shall know that He is Yahweh. And His Torah, that should be a sign upon your hand and His frontlets between your eyes. The law of Yahweh. The law of righteousness. So I want you to think about that. So in light of those things, when you think of the book of Revelation, since Almighty Yahweh doesn't change, and if you go to the book of Revelation, when it says, here is where the patience of the saints are to be tested, they who keep the commandments of Almighty Yahweh and have faith in Yeshua, Messiah. And they loved not their lives unto death. This were the Maccabeans. I'm going to show you here in a minute. They were the remnant that refused to fall under the mark of the beast system. When they saw the abomination of desolation spoken of in Daniel, they fled into the wilderness. And they resisted it. And they continued to keep the Torah of Almighty Yahweh and the Shabbat and the kosher. So why is it going to be any different in the future? This is the deception of Satan that many people are falling into. But it goes on. It says, thus by their power did they deal with the people of Israel that were found in the cities month after month. And on the 25th day of the month they sacrificed upon the altar of the idol that was over against the altar of Almighty Yahweh. Now the women that circumcised their children were slain according to the commandment of King Antiochus. And they hanged the children about their neck in all their houses. And those that had circumcised them, they put to death. And many of the people of Israel determined with themselves that they would not eat unclean things. And they chose rather to die than to be defiled with unclean meats. And they would not break the holy law of Yahweh. And they were put to death. And there was a great, very great wrath upon the people. Now I'm going to go to chapter 2. But before I go there, I want you to let that sink in for a minute. Hanukkah is not this all happy-go-lucky holiday where we sit and eat chocolate geld and we light the candles and things. Yes, there is a point to that, but I want you to think about the result or the cause of why we celebrate Hanukkah. It's a result of overcoming the beast. It's a result of cleansing the temple that was defiled under these foreigners who came into the land of Israel, into the land of Yehuda and Jerusalem, and were trying to force people to forsake the Torah of Almighty Yahweh, to eat unclean foods, to break the Shabbat, to break the holy days, to sacrifice to idols. This is what I want you to remember when you're reading and you're thinking about Hanukkah. This is what we should be thinking about. Don't just go right into the cleansing of the temple and everything's all hunky-dory. But think about what really took place. Now let's go to 2 Maccabee. So we see that Antiochus, this Seleucid king of Greece, came in, overthrew Egypt, and then came to Jerusalem. Israel defiled the temple, took over, took all of the holy things, set up Zeus Olympus, the Shekut Shemem, the Lord of heaven, the abomination of desolation in the temple, commanding the Israelites, the Jews, to worship this idol and to eat unclean foods and to defile themselves. And there were many apostates who did so, turned away from Almighty Yahweh, gave heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of demons. Antiochus came in commanding to abstain from marriage and eat foods that were not given to be eaten. All these same shadows. There's nothing new under the sun. So, it goes on in chapter 2 of Maccabee. It says, in those days arose Mattathias, or Mattatyahu, the son of Yochanan, or Yahunan, the son of Shimon, the son of Simon, a priest of the sons of Yehoreb, from Jerusalem, and he abode in the mountain of Modin. And he had 5 sons, John, who was surnamed Gadis, and Simon, who was surnamed Thassi, and Judah, who was called Maccabeah, or Maccabee, Judah Maccabee, the hammer, and Eleazar, who was surnamed Abaron, and Jonathan, who was surnamed Aphos. These men saw the evils that were done in the people of Yehuda and Jerusalem. And Mattathias said, woe to me! Wherefore was I born to see the ruin of my people, and the ruin of the holy city, and to dwell there, when it is given into the hands of the enemies? The holy places are come into the hands of strangers. Her temple is become as a man without honor. The vessels of her glory are carried away captive. Her old men are murdered in the streets, and the young men are fallen by the sword of the enemies. What nation has not inherited her kingdom and gotten of her spoils? All her ornaments are taken away. She that was free is made a slave. And behold, our sanctuary and our beauty and our glory is laid waste, and the Gentiles have defiled them. To what end should we live any longer? And Mattathias and his sons rent their garments, and they covered themselves with haircloth, it says, and made a great lamentation. And they that were sent from among King Antiochus came thither to compel them that were fled into the city of Modin to sacrifice and to burn incense and to depart from the Torah of Yahweh. When they say to sacrifice and burn incense, he's referring to burning incense and sacrifices to Zeus Olympus, this abomination of desolation that was set up in the holy place. And many of the people of Israel consented and came to them. But Mattathias and his sons stood firm. Remember, Yeshua said there's a wide gate that leads to destruction, and many there be that go in, but there's few who find righteousness. And it was the same case here. A great multitude of men forsake the Torah and went the way, the easy route, that gate, that wide gate that leads to destruction. And they were sent out from, so Mattathias and Judah and Jonathan and Simon and them, they stood firm against this and refused to follow the way of the nations. They refused to sacrifice to idols. And they that were sent from Antiochus answering said to Mattathias, you are a ruler and an honorable man and great man in this city, and adorned with sons and brethren. Therefore, it says, come thou first, and obey the king's commandment, as all nations have done, and all the men of Judah, and they that remain in Jerusalem. And you and your sons shall be in the number of the king's friends, and enriched with gold and silver and many presents. Then Mattathias answered and said with a loud voice, he made sure all of them could hear it, although all the nations obey King Antiochus, so as to depart every man from the service of the law of his fathers, and consent to his commandments, I and my sons and all my brethren will obey the law of our fathers. Yahweh be merciful to us, it is not profitable for us to forsake the Torah and the justices of Almighty Yahweh. We will not hearken to the words of King Antiochus. Neither will we sacrifice and transgress the commandments of our law to go another way. Now as he left off speaking these words, there came a certain Jew in the sight of all. Now, this is like Judas here, Judas Iscariot, in my opinion, a shadow of him in the past. But he came out in the sight of all to sacrifice to the idols upon the altar in the city of Modin according to the king's commandment. So he was a traitor, a Benedict Arnold, right? A Judas Iscariot. And Matthias saw it and was grieved, and his reins trembled, and his wrath was kindled according to the judgment of the Torah. His wrath was kindled according to the judgment of the Torah. And running upon him, he slew him upon the altar. It reminds us of, yes, it says, moreover, I was going to say it, but it's here right in the text. Moreover, the man whom King Antiochus had sent, who compelled them to sacrifice, he slew him at the same time and pulled down the altar. And he showed the zeal for the law as Phinehas did by Zomri, the son of Salome. And Matthias cried out in the city with a loud voice, saying, everyone that has zeal for the Torah, the law, and maintains the testament, let him follow me. And so he and his sons fled into the mountains and left all they had in the city. So again, if you see that part, what does the Messiah tell the children of Israel at his time before the coming destruction of the temple? The same kind of scenario. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of in Daniel sitting in the holy place, then flee into the wilderness. The same thing. It was a shadow of what happened in the book of Maccabee. You think they would have learned, but they did not. And it was because they forsaken the Torah once again. But here, these men stand tall, the sons of Maccabee. So him and his sons fled into the mountains. They left everything they had in the city. They didn't go to take anything. Many that sought after judgment and justice went into the desert, and they abode there, they and their children and their wives and their cattle, because the afflictions increased upon them. And it was told to the king's men and to the army that was in Jerusalem, in the city of David, that certain men who had broken the king's commandment were gone away into the secret places in the wilderness, and that many were gone after them. So there were a lot of people that did not want to break the Torah of Almighty Yahweh, and they fled as well into the wilderness. And forthwith they went out towards them and made war against them on the Sabbath day. And so on. And so the children of the Maccabees ended up fighting against Antiochus Epiphanes. They finally overcame them. I'm not going to read the whole story. But they ended up then taking back the temple of Almighty Yahweh. And when they took back the temple, and they brought the Kohanim in, the priests, to officiate, they only had enough sacred oil for the menorah to last one day. But according to the book of Maccabee, they poured the oil in, and it ended up lasting 8 days until they could then remake the proper oil for the service of the temple. So they then said, Nas Gadol Hayasham, or Nas Gadol Hayapo, or Bo. Nas Gadol Hayapo, a great miracle happened here, because they were living in the land of Israel. So if you live outside of the land of Israel on the day of Hanukkah, they say Nas Gadol Hayasham, a great miracle happened Sham, there. But they said Nas Gadol Hayapo, a great miracle happened here. But the point is, that's where you get that tradition of lighting the candles for 9 days or 8 days, plus the shamash, the servant candle. So you'd have 9. That's where you get this Hanukkah tradition. But the reason I was showing that is Judah Maccabee and them stood up against the beast system that was rising at that time. It goes on where Judah, Maccabee, and Mattathias and them come. Mattathias was going to die as this revolution took place against these Greeks. And he brought his sons near, it says in the second book of Maccabee. He says he brought him near, and he says, now hath pride and chastisement gotten strength in time of destruction, the wrath of indignation. Now therefore, O my sons, be zealous for the Torah, and give your lives for the covenant of your father. Give your lives for this covenant, and call to remembrance the works of the fathers, which they have done in their generations, and you shall receive great glory and an everlasting name. Was not Abraham found faithful in temptation, and it was reputed to him unto justice? Joseph, in the time of his distress, kept the commandment, and was made the ruler of Egypt. Phinehas, our father, being fervent in the zeal of Yahweh, received a covenant of an everlasting priesthood. Joshua, here they translate Jesus, that's funny. Joshua, talking about Joshua, which he fulfilled the word, was made ruler in Israel. Caleb, for bearing witness before the congregation, received an inheritance. David, by his mercy, obtained the throne of an everlasting kingdom. Eliyahu, while he was full of the zeal for the Torah, was taken up to heaven, it says. Ananias and Azarias and Mishael, by believing, were delivered out of the flame. Daniel, in his innocency, was delivered out of the mouth of the lions. And thus consider, through all generations, that none that trust in him shall fail in strength. And fear not the words of a sinful man, for his glory is dung and worms. Today he is lifted up, and tomorrow he shall not be found, because he is returned unto the earth, and his thought has come to nothing. You therefore, my sons, take courage and behave manfully in the law, for by it you shall be glorious. Not by forsaking the law, but by keeping the law and upholding it. And behold, I know that your brother Simeon, Shimon, is a man of counsel. Give ear to him always, and he shall be a father to you. And Yehuda Maccabee, who is valiant and strong from his youth, let him be the leader of your army, and he shall manage the war of the people. Now listen to what he says. And you shall take to you all that observe the Torah, and revenge ye the wrong of our people. Render to the Gentiles their reward, and take heed to the precepts of the Torah. And he blessed them, and was then joined to his fathers. And he died. He was buried, and so on, in Modin. And all of Israel mourned him with a great mourning. So the whole theme of this that I want you to see is the keeping of the Torah. And they fought against, Antiochus, and they overcame them, and so on and so forth. And so the lesson of Hanukkah more so is the focus of the sacrifice, in my opinion, of these men who refused to learn the ways of the nations. Do not be dismayed by the signs of heaven. What was the abomination of desolation? The Shekut Shemem was Baal Hashemayim, the Lord of heaven. But in Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 1 through 5, it says, do not learn the ways of the heathen. Do not be dismayed by the signs of the heavens. Play on words, in my opinion. And from this, we go to the first century with the Qumran, the land of the children of Qumran, and the Ebionim, the poor ones, who fled into the wilderness. the same as the Maccabees at that time. You had the sons of Zadok, the Tzadukim, who were opposition Sadducees, and then you had the establishment Sadducees who were in the temple, because by the time the Herodian kings had come in, one of the Herods came in and married one of the Maccabean daughters, Miriam, and she had sons, and Herod killed them to destroy the Maccabean bloodline. And after that, great deception fell in Israel in the first century. The establishment Pharisees and Sadducees were basically accommodating to Rome. So when Yeshua came forth, they said it's better for one man to die than the whole nation should be destroyed. These were the same Pharisees that took the star prophecy of a great king coming and applied it to the Romans when they came in instead. Titus, I believe it was one of them. They accommodated. Josephus, who wrote the book of Josephus, the Wars of the Jews and so on, was another man of accommodation who basically betrayed his country, wrote the works of Josephus, accommodated to the Romans, wrote an accurate history, but a lot of it, there are vestiges of it that show that he kind of accommodates to the Romans at that time. And what became known as Christianity is just an accommodation to the Romans as well. It's just idolatry and paganism. You know, they gave up the Torah. They compromised. And so now we see that in modern churchianity, in Christianity. There was no Judaization of Christianity. There was a Gentilization of Judaism. It was in the opposite manner. The first believers in Yeshua, HaMashiach, they didn't compromise. They didn't break the Torah. They didn't break the Shabbat. They continued to eat kosher. They continued to keep the Shabbat. They continued to keep the festivals, the Moadim of Hashem, until a compromise in the church. I don't even like to use that word, because the church comes from the word Kyriakos, which dates back to sun worship, circle, ancient sun worship. After the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, there was a compromise. And then an apostasy, a falling away from the faith, a giving of seduction to demons. A great deception that fell upon the masses, that they did not want to believe the love of the truth that they might be saved, so therefore they received a strong delusion. This happened way back. And we're living in that time. We're already living into that deception. The masses, the multitudes of people have already done what they did in the ancient times with the Maccabees. The Maccabees were the only ones that held firm. The Ebionim, those poor ones in the first century, the offshoots of Qumran, and the Essenes, Nazarenes or Nazareans, not Christians, but Jews who were uncompromising and held firm. They ultimately were destroyed as a result of their faith in the Torah of the Almighty. But many accommodated. And now we have, as a result, Christianity, which is just the worship of Zeus Olympus, the Lord of Heaven, the abomination of desolation, that many people have already taken the mark. He sought to change the times and the laws, wore out the saints of the Most High. He's ain't talking about Christianity. And that's the biggest deception of all. Hanukkah is dedication. Dedication to the worship of the Holy One according to the Torah and its precepts. Uncompromising faith. Love not your life unto death, and I shall give you the crown of life. Because these people kept the commandment of Almighty Yahweh and had faith in Yahshua HaMashiach. They didn't compromise. That's really the true story of Hanukkah. And that's the lesson that should really be learned about it. For 6 Emperor Tyrannus News, I'm Mark Matheny. Have a good day.